intended regulation, especially in Germany, along the supply chain. It's called Lieferkettengesetz, Supply Chain Act, which is intended to come into force beginning next year. And probably this is the most hot topic right now. And also, as Christina already mentioned, also my topic starts with the UN guiding principles, but here the guiding principles on business and human rights. Probably my glasses are not new, so I go closer to the screen here. And this is the only accepted framework right now, which gives some overall guidance how to regulate the properly human rights, let's say, violations along the supply chain. And this international framework is now transformed into national law, especially in Germany, but also on regional level, especially on EU level as well. I come to this later. And the principles, there are 3 pillars and 3 different directions. One direction is that the state has a duty to protect human rights on the one hand. On the other hand, addressing enterprises. Enterprises shall also have the responsibility to respect human rights. And last but not least, the victims, they should have a right for a remedy. So this is the basic framework. So the question arises, how does this go into practice and into day-to-day business of companies? So in Germany, on this, starting from this UN principles, a national plan was invented in 2016, which had a kind of history since the government was not sure if we require a regulation along the supply chain. So they made a survey, or exactly they made 2 surveys asking 3,000 and 2,200 German undertakings if they respect human rights. And well, the companies might be shocked on this question or something. So, but only 40% were responding, and the respondents, out of these respondents, only 18% stated that they currently meet the UN principles, easily speaking. Yeah? And so the government made the decision that we need a law regulating the human rights, regulating human rights along the supply chain. And this is currently known as the Supply Chain Act, Supply Chain Law. Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz is the German name, and this is a highly debated and controversial act, which is not yet enforced. This is everything is under discussion, still open, and is even no draft available. Probably this leads to the fact that the press, the newspapers, the internet is full with comments and statements on this law, but the only thing we've got in hand right now is a cornerstone paper coming from the Ministry of Gerd Müller and Mr. Heil, that's Development and Labor, probably more the left-winged part of the ministries, which published, or it was leaked, I think, this cornerstone paper, which is now also the basis for my presentation. And there's a strong opposition from this guy here, Mr. Altmaier, from the Federal Ministry of Economics, and the argument, and we will speak about the arguments later, it's quite easily speaking, from an economic perspective, there's always a fear that such a law would hinder competition or competition of German companies in the international framework. And it will be very interesting to see what will happen in the next months, since Chancellor Merkel, meanwhile, announced First of all, she was an opponent of this law, but she changed her mind during the corona crisis maybe, and now it's expected that at the beginning of next year we will see a draft of a new law on this supply chain regulation. So what is controversial in this regard, and I don't want to speak so much as a lawyer, so I try to bring it to the point here and make it quite easy. So first of all, the first question which arises is to which companies does this law apply? Does it only apply to large enterprises, large international groups? Honestly speaking, compliance mechanisms at these large undertakings are already in place. Might be a game easily to play for them to meet all the criteria which will derive from such a new law. But what's up with the small and medium undertakings? And this is probably the most interesting question, the scope. Should such a law to regulate the supply chain also apply to smaller companies? First point. Second, to what extent are companies responsible to respect human rights? Is it just for the direct supplier, your contract partner, or is it also? Are you also responsible? For example, you are a merchant of textiles and you produce in Bangladesh. You know, probably everyone in this room knows this kick case. But you're producing in Bangladesh and probably in the structures in Asia, it's quite obvious. Not everything is produced in one factory since there are sub-suppliers and sub-sub-suppliers and so on and so forth. So are you, as a German undertaking, are you responsible also for sub-suppliers meeting human rights standards? Second question. Third question in this regard, to what is your duty as an enterprise? For what kind of human rights violations are you responsible for? Is it just, it's not only just, but is it only child labor, or are you also responsible that deep in China, there's everyone meets all the environmental standards? Is it also your responsibility here in Germany? Third question. And last point, what happens in case of violation, infringements of human rights? Is it a civil responsibility, liability? Do you have to pay for damages? Or is it, will there be fines from some authority in Germany? It's quite unclear how to regulate and to enforce such a law. This given, what are the goals of a supply chain act in Germany? And this cornerstone paper just mentioned some of the goals, the main goals. I only concentrate on the main goals here. Improving working conditions abroad, being more sustainable, or having a more sustainable business, but also fair distribution of wealth, avoidance of exploitation, environmental protection. Probably this is the same. These are the same goals that you can also read in the UN principles, the underlying principles. Further goals, and this is more economically speaking, fair competition between companies, and I think this is a strong point. Companies who meet the compliance criteria and other companies who are not investing in such compliance measures which have might have a competitive advantage in this regard. But also increased legal certainty. This is a typical lawyer argument, I think. And also, and this is outcome of the survey, which I mentioned in the beginning, that a law would be better would have a stronger effect than a voluntary commitment which obviously doesn't seem to work. So, and last but not least, consumer confidence is being improved. Okay. So what is the scope in the current cornerstone? The starting point to, if you're from a company view, you have to look if it's applicable to me or not. First of all, the number of employees is the first threshold you have to meet. And currently, but it's under debate, it's 500 employees. Mr. Altmaier says, no, 5,000 is enough. This makes a huge difference. Handelsblatt, German business newspaper, found out that if it applies to already at a threshold of 500 employees, there would be around 8,000 companies in the scope, and probably if it's 5,000, it would be less. But what is important for large companies is it's on also international companies. It's a group perspective, which is decisive here. So if you're working for an affiliate with less than 500 employees, but the group has more than 500 employees, you're within the scope. But the decisive point here is that we are talking about a resistency and Ansässigkeit in Germany. What does it mean? No one knows exactly what does it mean. It's only mentioned in this cornerstone paper, but it seems to be that you need to have a strong footprint in Germany. So not only a seat, but strong operational and management activity here in Germany to be within the scope of this new law. So, and this is probably the most important thing on this new law. What duties or obligations are covered? What do I have to do as a company under the new Supply Chain Act? And this is a very interesting concept, even for lawyers, because I haven't seen it before in this form. To be on the safe side, let's say it like this, companies must endeavor to comply with the process standards. So if you do everything to comply with compliance standards, you are on the safe side. It's kind of a safe harbor then. So this means if there is a human rights violation happening in, let's say, Cambodia or Bangladesh, but you did everything to meet your compliance standards and have, let's say, a high standard of compliance work here with regard to human rights, there will be no civil liability for your company. And what makes it even more interesting is that it is so because the question arises: what is sufficient? What is enough for an enterprise, for an undertaking to meet human rights standards? And the cornerstone paper mentioned that companies must take appropriate action, and appropriate is the important word here. So it depends very much on your kind of business you are doing, and your size of the company. Since the argument is always smaller companies cannot meet the same standards than large companies, but here probably what will be in the law, I don't know because there is no draft, but it seems to be very much that probably if you are if you are in the textile business where it's quite common that the working conditions in Asia, let's say, are critical. You have to take a deeper look into these conditions. Other than when you, I don't know, in the automotive supply industry, and most of your parts are delivered from Eastern Europe, where you don't have, or the standards are probably higher there, I assume. Another very important point, and from my personal view, is that this is very critical because the cornerstone paper makes no distinction between the supply chain. It mentions the whole supply chain. So you're responsible, your measures have to make sure, your compliance measures, that the whole supply chain is covered. Also, sub-suppliers, sub-suppliers, which you're probably even not aware of. You know, this is in the current cornerstone paper a huge practical problem from my point of view. So we're still in the question what obligations are covered or will be covered by such a law, and the cornerstone paper makes it, let's say, quite easy. It simply mentioned very broad wording that you have to, as a company, you have to respect all internationally recognized human rights. Well, probably this is the point where my clients take the telephone and call me. What does it mean? And I just can provide you with some examples. Means forced labor, child labor, discrimination, and so on and so forth. But the most important and very interesting points are here, that also the current in this follows from some statements from German politicians that also environmental protection and corruption will be part of what is understood with international recognized human rights. So this means, as in the worst case, you're a small German company with 501 employees, and then you have to make sure that even in the country of origin where your suppliers are working, you did all appropriate measures to avoid corruption. Probably no one knows in this room how this should work, but we will see. And what is expected? What actions do you have to take? And it's also very broad. You must prevent all negative effects and minimize them and eliminate them by installing, for example, complaint mechanisms, and you have to participate in the cornerstone paper mentions external procedures. I think this means that you have to go to these international standardization organizations and become a member of it. I think this must be the aim behind this wording. And again, this must all your measures have to be reasonable. And the problem is that this all requires a self-assessment. So you're sitting here in, let's say, in the Frankfurt area, and in the end, from your desk, you have to make a self-assessment that you comply with all these criteria. Furthermore, it's the current discussion also includes reporting obligations in two sides. One side is that you have to make public reporting. This, I think, in the current times, it's can only mean that you have to report your measures in the internet, probably on your website. And furthermore, you have to report to authorities. It's even not clear right now in Germany which authority will be competent in this regard, but there will be also an official reporting obligation. So, last but not least, what happens in case you don't do enough, you're infringing your duty to comply? And it's quite easy that there will be no criminal liability. I think this is a big improvement already, since I'm a cartel lawyer, and if you're doing very much in competition laws, you see the biggest problem worldwide is criminal liabilities, especially in the US or something. But there will be no criminal liability in Germany, and authorities may impose fines, okay, for violations. I think this is clear. And at least on a German perspective, this also means that you can be excluded from public tenders. But the most important point is this civil liability, and I think at least from a company or economic perspective, it's quite thankful that this liability is limited. Since, first of all, the liability is directed to a compensation of damages, quite clear, but only in cases where, and let's say, the violation of human rights was foreseeable and avoidable, and this is also clear. But now and you will see that this won't be a big harm for the German economy or for companies, because affected persons can sue companies in Germany for violation of their human rights. Okay. It's quite easily speaking, but who are the affected persons? These are persons, in my example in Bangladesh, who can start suing you in Germany, probably what they will never do, since they might even don't have the funding to do that. But especially compensation claims in Germany, you are not getting rich in this case. If you go to the US, everyone knows you get millions, but in Germany, there is not so much damage claims compensation. And furthermore, to make it even harder for these people to sue in Germany, they have the burden of proof. It means they have to prove that you have violated, you as a German company has violated your duties to comply with this German Supply Act. Quite hard, I think. And to make it even more harder for the claimants, there's a safe harbor planned that if you meet all the, I try to explain it easily. If you comply with all industry standards, which are usually in your industry, you are not liable for negligence. It means you are only liable for intent. So if you intentionally, if you have intentionally not complied with your duties, then you are liable. So this means, in practical, I think there won't be any claim in Germany under this new law if this comes into force beginning of next year, since the burdens for claimants are too high. So, and it's, as I said at the beginning, it's highly discussed, and there's many voices on this topic, and I only picked out some of these voices which are really critical on this new, even at this cornerstone paper. But as I mentioned, also the German ministries have different views on this law. So it will be really interesting what will be in the end regulated in the law. So what are the arguments? The Supply Chain Act in Germany would be an additional burden, particularly, this is quite interesting, particularly during the pandemic. So hopefully this will end, and I think afterwards you can also argue that this will be a burden and have a huge, and I think this will be clear, it will have a huge financial impact for the German industry. And it's quite hard to foresee the liability, since even at least the current discussion also covers the supply chain beyond your direct contract partners, which is quite hard to foresee. And what's also within the discussion is that companies might fear the additional costs for this compliance mechanism and simply stop doing business in some countries, which wouldn't help anyone there. It's too expensive for smaller companies, already mentioned. And the Altmaier argument that the number of employees is much too low, that the scope must be more focused on larger companies. And Yeah, and brings me to the next and last point. The national regulation in Germany might result in a competitive disadvantage compared to other companies. This argument is not so strong since when we look across our borders, especially there's much going on in this regard on EU level and other member state levels, and especially, and I think this might become even more important than the German perspective, is the EU perspective. Since in August, the EU announced that they're planning an EU-wide regulation, what from my point of view absolutely makes sense to make this EU-wide. So then you don't have this argument that you bring a member state into a disadvantage compared to other member states. And there are also some different national acts already in place, for example in France, in Italy, in the Netherlands, and there are some other laws, and on my desk there was a case some months ago. It was related to this, everyone knows it as blood diamonds. There are some regulations and some law already in place with respect to certain products, and for example, it's called the Kimberley regulation for diamonds, and there are already some regulation about the supply chain for special areas. Okay, that's it for the moment. I think it will be a very let's say interesting autumn, and I think we will see beginning of next year what will be the outcome of this Supply Chain Act in Germany. Thank you very much for your attention. I think questions can be asked in the roundtable.
Yeah, we will have a short coffee, or half an hour, 20 minutes coffee break, and then after that we will get back in here for the roundtables and more discussions.
Okay. Thank you.